helps both large corporations and small businesses with insurance, risk management, and employee benefits using the same values they've held true for over 30 years: knowledge, vision, accountability, and service. More information is at bmbinc.com.
Hello, I'm Marcia Kavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. We have managed to move smoothly from three of our most popular spectator events at one time: football season, carnival, and now a legislative session. We'll be discussing the latter as the lawmakers convene Monday for a special session. We'll also examine the Jefferson Parish Sheriff's election as well as Carnival Past. And we'll take a special look at a school that will be shut down, restructured, reopened, and why. On our roll are tonight's Informed Sources: Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources; Jeremy Alford, publisher, LawPolitics.com; Marta Jewson, reporter, The Lens; and Tyler Bridges, reporter, The New Orleans Advocate. Go over to Jeremy first, and it seems like we've been here before. Yet another special session. This will be the, fifth one in the past couple of years?
I believe so. Number 5, and it's the beginning of a whole new year of session palooza, as I like to call it. And it starts on Monday, and we're nearing the fiscal cliff that Governor John Bel Edwards has been speaking about for about a year and a half. The good news is that there does seem to be a handshake agreement between the administration and the House on a number of items. The first being the state sales tax structure, and that's really probably what this entire special session is going to come down to: is what happens with our sales tax structure. And prior to this term, we had a 4-penny state sales tax structure. That's just the state. You pay an additional amount for local sales taxes, but a 5th penny was added, and it's coming off the books at the end of the fiscal year. And the question is, what do you do with that 5th penny? Do you get rid of it? Do you keep it? Well, it seems like the answer is you keep a piece of it. And we're talking in fractions now, and we're getting into math. But the agreement seems to be to keep half of that 5th penny. And of that half, a quarter would become permanent, would stay on the books. Another quarter of that half would be used as a bridge to somewhere. We keep hearing these ideas about fiscal reform and about budget structural reforms, and needing that money to get to the point where the cash starts coming in from those reforms. What happens to those other 2 quarters of that half is another question. There's a big push to dedicate it to transportation. Basically, anybody who's anybody at the Capitol wants a piece of that penny. There also seems to be an agreement on this Ohio checkbook model, which is being billed as this transparent online ledger for state expenses. It was implemented in Ohio. It digs pretty deep on local and state finances. You can actually look at the expenses that took place on a certain day. There's also some talk about making the reduction to the exemptions from 2015 permanent, and also there's an agreement on moving forward with some of these Medicaid reforms in terms of work requirements. At the same time, the governor has his own agenda that there is no handshake on. And I got to say, before we go any further, that an agreement at the state capitol isn't what it used to be. It may be good right now. It may not be good by Monday when they go in at 4 o'clock. But the governor's looking at business utilities, industrial utilities, the compression of tax brackets, a lot of items, especially the compression of those income tax brackets back to pre-Stelly levels. I don't know anyone at the state capitol who thinks that income tax idea has any legs at all. We've seen the governor do this before, though. He'll come forward with a tax idea, like we saw with the commercial activity tax, that had no hope whatsoever of getting out of committee, but he pushes it anyway. And I think you're going to see a lot of politics and positioning and a lot of rhetoric as we get into it.
So when you talk about, the fiscal cliff, what are we facing now? A deficit of over $1 billion, is it?
It's roughly $1 billion. It depends on who you ask. If everything that in that handshake agreement that we spoke about gets passed, according to folks who are working on that deal, there's still a shortfall of 160 to 190 million, somewhere in that neighborhood. But the numbers, one recurring theme you're going to hear is the question is the numbers being questioned. Is this actually the number for the fiscal cliff? Is this actually the amount of money that half a cent of sales tax is going to bring in. And as of right now, as of Friday, there are bills being pre-filed for the special session that begins on Monday, but most of them are Medicaid related. There's one Louisiana checkbook bill that's been filed, but no tax bills. And the longer you wait to file a tax bill, the longer you have to wait for a fiscal note. And a fiscal note is an analysis that tells you how much money is going to come in, how much it's going to cost, and that's really been a sticking point in recent sessions.
I think what it's going to come down to is that the governor is going to insist on certain changes to the tax system. And the House Republican leadership, particularly led by the Speaker Taylor Barra, is going to insist on certain anti-spending measures, including a cap on state spending, and then some of the Louisiana version of this Ohio checkbook, which again, as Jeremy mentioned, is a transparency model online, and then also the Medicaid changes that the House Republican leadership wants. So each side has got something that it's going to insist on. The question is that handshake deal that Jeremy talked about, can that actually prove reality with the passage of legislation that both sides can accept?
And so in order to plug this hole, to plug this deficit, this has to be taken care of during the special session, right? Because regular session, they can't raise revenue. Is that
exactly
correct?
When you're in an even-numbered year like we are right now, you can only take up most tax issues, especially anything that generates additional revenue. You can only do that in a special session. You cannot bring it up in a regular session. So if lawmakers fail over the next 17 days starting on Monday, they can either be called back into a special session immediately, a very quick one, or they'll have to go into another special session after the regular session, which is just politically, it sounds like a nightmare for some of these folks, because what's going to have to happen is they're going to have to pass a budget during the regular session that includes what could be upwards to $1 billion worth of cuts, or they just don't pass the budget at all and come back in a special session.
So real hot button cause is always TOPS. Where does that stand now?
Well, there was a task force that was put together to recommend some changes, and a lot of the conversations were starting to develop along class lines and along racial lines, and it was looking to be a very emotional debate. The task force at the end of the day ended up recommending nothing. They couldn't come to an agreement on anything. The governor has come forward and said that he doesn't necessarily want to see any major changes made to TOPS. So if there are any drives to do something on that popular scholarship program, it's probably going to come from individual lawmakers, individual efforts.
Although I think, as Jeremy has talked about, the governor has put forth a budget that does not have that $1 billion and says, okay, I don't want to do this budget, but if you guys don't come up with the revenue, and part of that is deep cuts to the TOPS program if the money doesn't come forth.
Okay, so the action begins this Monday. We'll see what goes on in Baton Rouge. I know you're going to be spending some time there, you too, both of you guys. Okay, over to Tyler right now. We have a sheriff's race in Jefferson Parish coming up next month. So what's it looking like in terms of, you wrote a piece earlier this week about the strategy of both of the candidates.
Yeah, it's interesting because there really hasn't been a competitive race for the sheriff in Jefferson Parish since Ronald Reagan was president. And so these kinds of competitive races don't come along very often. We have the incumbent, not the incumbent sheriff, but the sheriff who was appointed, Joe Lopinto, is a former state house member, appointed to the position by Newell Normand in July when Newell left to go become a talk show host on WWL radio. And Joe is being challenged by Johnny Fortunato, who was the longtime spokesman for Jefferson Parish. A lot of people have probably seen him on TV. And I sort of would assume that Fortunato is the challenger, since Lopinto has taken over the job at the nod of the longtime popular Sheriff Newell Normand.
Now, Sheriff Lopinto was a deputy with JPSO, right? Wasn't he before? Actually, while he was going to law school, and then he became a legislator. Right,
and yeah, that's correct. And then Fortunato was a patrol cop years and years, or deputy years ago, but then for a long time he's been the public face of Jefferson Parish, the sheriff's office.
Yeah, I can remember John Fortunato back in the 70s when I was just a young reporter. So, I mean, he's been on the force for a very long time.
And he's using that long experience to say experience matters. I'm the guy. Lopinto is saying, well, what you've really been is the spokesman. You haven't really been out in the street. You haven't really been the guy doing this kinds of the real work. And Lopinto makes the point that while the public probably cares most about how quickly the patrol deputies respond if you call 911 in Jefferson Parish, but he makes the point, the real point is managing the $125 million budget, a 1,500 person workforce, and all the legal issues and all those sorts of things.
So who has the most money?
Joe Lopinto has about twice as much money as Fortunato. He's going to be raising even more. He's having more and more fundraisers, and that gives him an advantage. Lopinto also has the vast majority of endorsements. I called 40 elected officials in Jefferson Parish. Of them, 26 were with Lopinto, 7 were with Fortunato, and 7 were not with either candidate. Endorsements over the years, I think, have mattered less in political races, but I'm thinking that they are going to matter more in this one because the turnout is going to be low. I'm estimating a turnout of about 25%, and that could negate the advantage that Fortunato has among voters in his higher name recognition. People may know him, but they may not turn out to vote, and so that would not help him, obviously. So.
We'll have to look at the political legacy. Newell Norman, as sheriff, the couple of times he ran, was winning but in the 90th percentile the times he ran. And of course, he inherited from Harry Lee, who was a very popular sheriff all his time. And so he is the candidate of a very popular political dynasty. Even though sometimes voters resent dynasties, popular or not, and it's a factor. But Lopinto's also had the advantage of being like the incumbent, of being on TV a lot, and being the spokesman, and sheriffs, sometimes they wear their uniforms, and sometimes they wear their suits, and all this. Sometimes he tends to wear the uniform, look more like a cop, and so he's had the TV advantage.
Yeah, he definitely has that advantage of going before the cameras and putting his face before the camera, being the fact that he is a sheriff. So the race is, what's the date again?
March 24th.
So it's just really right around the corner.
Yeah, now that Mardi Gras is over, I think people are going to be seeing a fair number of ads on TV from both Joe Lopinto and John Fortunato.
Okay, all right, thanks a lot, Tyler. Over to Marta right now, and you reported on a proposal, or a plan perhaps we should say, by the Orleans Parish School Board regarding McDonough 35. And to keep it alive, they're proposing sort of an unusual approach.
Right, so we haven't seen the school board do this thing before, but what they want to do is they want to phase out the current traditional school, which will be the last traditional school in the city this year. So they're kind of turning everything over at one time, it seems. And what they want to do is they want to hire a second private contractor to come in and start a new privately run school in the building. One of the stipulations of that second contractor is that they have to name the new school McDonough 35.
By a traditional school, you mean a school run by the school board?
By the
like
school
Right,
board.
directly by the
school
school
boards used to
board.
be, yeah.
Yep.
Right, because just about all the schools now in Orleans, and ultimately when the reunification comes, all the schools except McDonough 35 and with the school at the Youth Detention Center will be charter schools.
They will be charter schools, yep.
in Orleans Parish. So what they're proposing to do with McDonough 35, which of course is a school that's near and dear to the hearts of many here in New Orleans, is to actually, they have an RFP out for a private operator to shut down the existing school, or let's say evolve it.
Right,
and then an RFP for a second operator.
They have 2 RFPs out. One to close out, phase out the other school grade by grade. They gave that. They're giving that company a 3-year max. So next year will only be 10th through 12th grade. And year after that, it'll be 11th.
So they'll wait till that cohort just graduates. But meanwhile, those 2 schools will operate under the same roof.
Right. Simultaneously, a second operator will come in. They will start a school from the ground. So they'll start with the 9th grade and grow it to 9 through 12 eventually.
So what is a reaction to this? I mean, the McDonough 35 alumni group has really been a very, very active one and very vocal. And didn't they even try to take over the school for a while? Or
Yeah,
some
they
elements
did.
of
They
it?
did apply to charter the school. That didn't end up happening. But they've definitely been in talks with the district all along. So it's very clear that the two have been in discussions over the last couple months. The alumni group obviously wants to keep the school alive, and this seems like a way to do that. So I'm assuming that they're, appeased to this idea.
But you haven't really gotten any comment yet from the Alumni Association, from that alumni group. It's like, yeah, we're really behind this.
Right. So in the initial news release that came out, and the alumni group said the statement was something along the lines of, "We thank the board for listening to us and for taking our ideas." It wasn't a ringing endorsement. And a couple days later, the school board changed the headline on their news release to say, we're partnering with the Alumni Association to do this. So it seems as if those talks have been evolving even since that release came out.
Well, let me take a step back, because I know you cover schools and charter schools in particular. What do you see when you look at the big picture with charter schools? Is it working?
I think just like public or traditional public schools, some of them work really well and some of them don't. So what we're seeing now is the system is interesting in that it's a different level of management and a different level of managing things. Like we're having these test irregularities at Singleton Charter School, and the state kind of can only come in quietly and say, we think we see cheating, and the charter gets to respond, and then they say, well, actually we see this, and so everything is kind of just more negotiated, if that makes sense.
So we can continue to see the public education in Orleans continue to go through a little bit of a change, more of a change, and that we're going to have almost
Basically all charter to contract
charter in Orleans Parish, and the reunification happens this summer, right? All righty, Marta, thanks a lot. Let's go over to Jeremy again. And
this is when the show gets really interesting,
well,
right?
it does. Jeremy has something really interesting to say. We have just wrapped up a very nice carnival season, which unfortunately here in New Orleans was marred by some shootings at the very end of a really beautiful day. But it's sort of, the carnival season kind of started too with some controversy with Mobile placing billboards right outside of town saying, if you really want, true Mardi Gras, we started first and the best one's over there. Well, no, yeah. So
he's going to tell us where the real best one is, right?
He is now talking about the one that he experienced, which he says was really great.
Oberlin Mardi Gras. I went to the, I grew up going to Mardi Gras. I'd like to believe I've done many facets. I've done Washington Mardi Gras for many years. I rode in Endymion. I ride in my hometown parade in Port Allen. But I got invited by the Ryder family in Oberlin to go run Mardi Gras. And that's what it's called there. It's not riding, it's running. And I think when most people hear that they think of, you go out and you chase chickens, but it's much more than that. And, as soon as I put that costume on and the capuchon and the mask and,
so we're
and
talking
get
Bayou
out,
Country, right?
Bayou Country. Yeah. I was struck immediately by this sincere and deep sense of nostalgia that these guys have about that holiday. And at the same time, I was struck by just how crazy it is. I've partied with a lot of people too over the years, and these guys know how to do it. From 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., it is nonstop. And you really get to learn what that community is all about by getting on that route and riding through the countryside and stopping at homes and performing and dancing in exchange for gumbo ingredients, and trying to get a few donations for the Capitan along the way. But it's amazing. One thing I didn't know is everyone assumes that the chickens that are caught out there go into the communal gumbo, but that gumbo is being cooked throughout the day and it's ready for you when you get back. The person who catches that chicken gets to keep the chicken. Did
you go back home with some chickens?
No, look, I knew I had one good run in me, and I went after that chicken, but they fast. And plus, if you would have saw my costume, you would know what I already know, which is I look too pretty to be fast out there.
Let me guess, either the chicken or you wasn't sober.
Oh, well, that's neither here nor
7 to
there.
7, need you ask? So, you literally are running after the chicken, like on foot you're running, or were you on horseback?
I tried it once. The chicken's fast, but there are a bunch of guys who do ride horseback, and then there are others who ride on trailers. And there's an old trailer and a young trailer. And even though I turned 40 last month, I was on the young trailer. And you ride and play music the whole time. But most of those guys are on horseback, and it's amazing to see some of them get up on that horse and stand on that horse's back and dance and. It's a sight to see, and I'm fortunate that I got to do it. I'm going back next year.
And what kind of distance is covered?
Ooh, I think we're being pulled by a trailer that's moving about 4 or 5 miles per hour. But if I had to guess, it's probably 10 to 15 miles, maybe.
Going through the country.
You see, y'all make me do math again. Y'all
Yeah, we have made you do that. Well, it sounds like a lot of fun, and I know you'll look forward to doing it again next year. Well, here in New Orleans, we have the New Orleans Mardi Gras, which is also a lot of fun and can be definitely crazy, but a different sort.
And if you want to chase chicken, you go to Popeyes. And
That's
so,
right.
it was a lot easier. Just quickly, not to sound like too much of an egghead about this, but there's old traditions in carnivals. And that Cajun Mardi Gras goes back to really medieval, what was called a visitation tradition, where the poor people would gather outside the castle and they'd cook stuff and they'd go and they'd beg something from the elite. And it was all kind of pre-planned. So there's always been a tradition of like a day of begging and go on. And so theoretically you're begging for a gumbo on this day, and that strand just came and it's a totally different type of Mardi Gras from New Orleans, which is just a different type of tradition. So it's amazing that in one state, two areas not too far apart have two different origins of Carnival celebrations, which is pretty unusual. But looking at Mardi Gras here, I think it was successful. It was threatened by the weather. If only we could figure out how to deal with the weather. But I think there was a good decisive moment, and that was early in that first week when when it looked like Endymion was going to be like 90% chance of rain that night. It looked like it was going to be weather all over. It was going to be havoc, and people were talking about juggling the parade schedules. And to his credit, I think the police chief says nobody's changing their dates. Because once you do that, you're pushing something around you, you're affecting somebody else's day. And I think that's a good rule. And it used to always be that, and they started fudging on it a little bit, but you got a date, you stick with that date. Now maybe you can talk about changing the time on the day that they came, but once it was resolved that Endymion was going to parade that Saturday and wasn't going to parade behind Bacchus that Sunday, then that made things easier to decide. And the fact is that when it was time for Endymion to roll, it started like a half hour early. Most of it did well, except for about the last half hour when the skies just opened up.
Yeah, I can attest to that.
Yeah,
My daughter and I sat through that rain, and it was really hard rain, but it was actually warm, so it wasn't
and when
too bad.
it came down heavy. But before that, it was nice. Mardi Gras Day itself was really nice. There were a couple of legal changes, and I guess we have to see the impact of. A big thing for the parade routes was taking a right on Canal Street, whereas in the past they get to Canal Street, take a loop usually to Elks Place and come back. And I think part of it was done just for safety reasons, that they were figuring, when you got a parade making a loop, there's too many people contained in that area between them. And I think some people saw potential danger there. And so instead they just turned down Canal Street. No parade captain that I talked to regretted that they thought it just made their parade quicker. They didn't particularly see any need for that loop that had been there for a long time. I can tell you from the crowd control, it made being on the other side of Canal Street a lot easier. I'm sure a couple of hotels like the Roosevelt and the Ritz-Carlton missed not having parades coming closer to them. But it seems to me like that was a good change. The other change was cutting down on the number of walking groups. I'm a big fan of the walking groups. I think they bring a lot of visual life at street level, and I hope that they take a hard look at that and allow some flexibility with it.
Those walking groups are some of the zany groups, like isn't it the Elvises and the Barca Loungers?
They're a lot of fun. I mean, a lot of fun if you're down at the street level. The Lacey boys, the guys in the easy chairs. And so it's not just looking up at the float, it's actually interacting. Of course, it brings in a whole new group of people to be a part of Mardi Gras. So I hope the rules aren't too strict about that and they allow that growth. But speaking of growth, I think there's a lot of it in Mardi Gras. There's certainly a lot of growth among women. With like a new crew like Nyx, La Femme Fatale, a couple of crews that started over the last few years. There's growth going into the Marigny area along St. Claude with that whole New Orleanian type. So there's probably more people participating in Mardi Gras in an organized way than there's ever been.
Well, it was a good Mardi Gras season, would you proclaim?
I think it was good, and it was a little bit early. Next year is March 5th, so it will not have happened yet, but we'll be in the middle of it. And of course, the later the Mardi Gras, usually the better, because the more time people have to recover from Christmas and get ready for it, and the more likelihood that you have warmer weather.
All righty, thanks a lot. Let's quickly touch base over with Jeremy one more time. And as the governor's going into this legislative special session and the regular session, but he's also going to be facing re-election. Who's going to be facing him?
Well, we're looking at a very large slate of people, but. Jeff Landry right now is someone that he's going back and forth with on this painkiller issue, saying that Medicaid expansion is allowing folks to get these medicines and then sell them at 100% markup on the streets. Really, that's just kind of the kind of same old song and dance we've seen, is Jeff Landry going after the governor going after Jeff Landry. At the same time, Congressman Ralph Abraham from Northeast Louisiana filed legislation in Congress to create this rural infrastructure program that is being interpreted by many as a go around the legislature and the governor, and that the legislation is aimed directly at the governor. He's already made a few hires. He's looking like he's going to likely be a candidate. The big question mark is hovering over John Kennedy's head, the favorite wit of the Capitol Press Corps now, it seems. Who knows? John Kennedy's political MO has always been to wait till the last minute and milk it for everything it's worth and then make a decision in some kind of big splashy way. And I wouldn't imagine that this is going to be any exception at all. There's also a state senator, Sharon Hewitt, who is thinking about running, and she has actively been out campaigning and speaking to community groups. And she got an opportunity to question the governor during a budget hearing and kind of zinged him really good one time. But there's also...
She scored some points, didn't she?
She did. There's also the president of the Louisiana Association of Business and Industry, Stephen Wagenspack. He's another one of those folks who hasn't said one way or the other, but the speculation continues to center on him as well.
Race next year? The election is next year, isn't it?
2019.
In 2019. You
Just
see
around
another
the corner.
book in the future?
You mean,
About
could we tell people that we wrote a book on the
Yeah,
governor's
you
race?
can, the 2015 one, yeah. Well, it'll be certainly an interesting time. You just gave us a nice long list of candidates, and I'm sure that that's not going to be the end of it.
The
no?
race has certainly already started. There's
All
going to be a
right.
lot of national interest.
All right, okay. Well, things are also going to start in Baton Rouge this week, so that'll be interesting too. Looking ahead.
In answer to Tyler's question, no, you can't tell people you wrote a book on the governor's race. Okay? Saturday mornings, at least in my neighborhood, somewhere between 10 and 11, you'd always hear from down the block an amplified sound saying, "We got Okra." And that was, of course, the sound of Mr. Okra coming, and people would listen to it and they'd gather. And lately, he'd been missing some of his rides. Members of his family, his daughter, and relatives had been doing it with the same chant, but not quite the way that Mr. Okra had it. Of course, we know he died this week. But what's something you want to see as part of a city? Well, I mean, something that depicts the richness of urban life, seeing that. So he's going to be missed. Hope his family carries it on, though.
All righty, thanks. Jeremy.
Tomorrow is the first major election in Louisiana. Tomorrow, Saturday, there's a House race in Tangipahoa in a House district. The governor's backyard, his hometown, he chose not to get involved. But we're going to learn tomorrow if there's going to be a runoff or if we have a new member of the House of Representatives.
Okay, thanks, Jeremy. Marta?
McDonough 35's Alumni Association is meeting on Monday night. It's a meeting that is closed to members of that association, but I'm sure we'll learn something after that meeting.
Okay, thanks a lot, Marta. Tyler?
Yeah, going back to the special session that begins Monday, as Jeremy mentioned, the key question is going to be on sales tax, whether you renew maybe half of the the 1 cent that was previously approved. My guess is that it's going to take a while, a number of days, before we really get a clear sense of that. And my guess is that the Ways and Means Committee, which takes up tax legislation first in the House, is going to engage in some sort of delay to find out what happens on the anti-spending measures.
Okay. Well, we'll see. All right, guys, thanks a lot for being here. Thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.
All right.
The firm of Bowen, McLeod, and Britt helps both large corporations and small businesses with insurance, risk management, and employee benefits using the same values they've held true for over 30 years: knowledge, vision, accountability, and service. More information is at bmbinc.com.